Hello everyone. This is a project I've just completed that I'm pretty proud of. This is an oak dresser from probably around the 19 teens, made by the Statesville Furniture Company of Statesville, North Carolina. This was a fun piece to work on. It's all oak with the original beveled glass. All the parts and everything are original, so this was a really fun project. The Statesville Furniture Company operated from 1900 to 1933 in Statesville, North Carolina. It came up around the time of a lot of industrialization in that area, and they prided themselves on being able to make cheap furniture for people who lived and worked in the mills around Statesville. So this is a nicer piece of furniture, but it's made to look a lot nicer than it is. So there's a lot of applied things like the carving, which is not carved into one piece. It's actually little pieces that are attached to other pieces. But then also you've got some of the front facings, a lot of the really pretty tiger striped grain that's in there are pieces that are applied to other parts of oak. So it's all oak, but it's pieces applied to the top. So like this top is several pieces glued together, not one large piece. So that's a way to make a nicer piece of furniture, make it look nicer without using really expensive solid pieces of wood. So you can make a cheaper piece of furniture to put out there. So with this piece, it came to me in pretty good shape. The finish had worn through in a few places. There was a lot of wear and tear on the drawers, so it needed a good bit of work. That one of the things that I had to do was clean up the finish to give it a really light sanding, but then also where the finish had worn through on places like the feet, some of the places like here at the top where in handling a lot of the finish wears off, I had to put shellac over the top of it. Someone at some point had refinished this piece and used what I think is a polyurethane based on how it looked whenever I sanded it out. The coating on the top and some other places was good enough to where I didn't want to remove all of it. So what I did was just sand it down, even it up so that it looked nice, and used a linseed oil wax over the top. But again, where the finish had worn off, I used the shellac that I prepared over some of those spaces, buffed it out, and then used the linseed oil wax over the top of that to make the finish look even all the way around. Now, some of the structural things that I had to repair on this, the back of the mirror was starting to come off. At one point, there were lath pieces to hold the mirror in place, and in its previous restoration, someone had used glazier's points to put it back together. Those had started to fall out, so I just cut lath pieces similar to what would have been original, attached it to the back of this. Also, a couple of the screws that were on the mirror had busted, so I had to pull them out. Some of the heads had broken off, so I had to use an easy out, pull them out, replace them with period-looking screws. So this mirror is pretty neat too because it actually moves. So you can adjust it to wherever you want it, turn it up, turn it down. So got it to where you can move the mirror again. Another thing that I did to this piece was to cut a key. The original key was long gone. Each one of these drawers has a lock. So I got the locks working again, cut a key that works on every one of these locks. There's a little escutcheon on the front which covers the keyhole which had popped out, so having to replace those, get that put together. The drawer pulls needed some work too. They were pretty loose. So on the backs sides of this, where the screws had been tightened, untightened, it had wallowed out a bit of a hole. A simple way to fix that is just to use a washer. You don't really need to shorten the screw itself because it'll just pull down into the wood. You can just use a washer to take up some of the space and it'll make the drawer pull nice and tight. The case itself needed a bit of work too, where some glue joints had come unpopped, where things had come loose. So just going in, gluing it all back together, tightening everything up, making sure that it's square. Another thing I had to do was reapply corner pieces, attach some of the other decorative parts that had come loose where the glue had come loose. Also, the frame for this mirror had come loose, so this top piece attaches onto this pedestal, and then the base attaches onto the pedestal as well. It was only put together with nails, so I used a 3-inch screws that I countersunk in, that way you could pull them up tight, get everything together, glued it, so that everything is nice and tight so this thing does not wobble at all. Also, the brackets that hold the mirror on had been taken apart, put together many times. The holes had been wallowed out, so I had to drill the holes out, plug them with pieces of oak, and re-drill the holes, and use new screws that were all the same size. Another important thing that I did to this dresser was to fix the bottom rails of the drawers. So it had been used quite a bit. One of the things that happens with these old dressers is that whenever you pull the drawer in and out many times, the bottoms of the rails wear off. So it lowers the drawer and actually makes it where stops on the bottom will rub against the bottom of the drawer. The bottom boards on these drawers had been worn so much they were worn almost completely through in places. So I had to replace the bottoms of the drawers, but then with the rails themselves, The way you fix that is to cut off the old part of the old rail where it's angled, glue in a new piece, and then shave it down so that it's even and everything is square across the bottom. So then put a nice coat of wax so that whenever you pull these drawers in and out, they're nice and smooth and won't hang up on you, won't bind whenever you're pulling them back and forth. A couple of the stops, there's stops that are just inside the front rails of these to keep the drawers from pushing too far in, had come out, had gotten bent, so I had to readjust those, put it all back together. So it was a lot of work to this, but nothing that was absolutely terrible. Fortunately, the finish was in good shape. It had not suffered any water damage. It hadn't suffered any real structural damage, more just use over time. So this was a pretty fun project to do and pretty easy to do. Another thing to say about this is that the glue I used to put it together is high glue that I made myself. And so why I do that rather than using yellow glue is that I can control the process. So I can make it where it dries slower, dries faster. I know what's in it, so I can adjust it to fit my needs. But then also it's reversible, completely reversible. So you can use heat to make the high glue let go. That way if you need to repair it at some point, you don't have to tear the thing apart. You can just use heat, the glue will come apart, you can repair things, put it all back together again. Also, the shellac is something that I made myself. That way I can adjust the color, I can adjust how quickly it dries, how thickly it applies. But then also the linseed oil wax that I use is something that I make myself. That way with that I can adjust the color, I can adjust the oil to wax ratio. That way whenever it lays I can make it look different. So with this, what I wanted was a nice silky sheen and not a mirror finish, which is part of the reason I used the oil wax. That way it makes this nice silky finish on it. So again, this was a fun project to do. It took a good bit of work to get the finish looking the way it does, but a nice historical piece, which is a kind of fun to look at, and really a gorgeous, gorgeous piece. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about this, and stay tuned for more projects like this in future.